Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is Debbie G of Spirituality Gone Wild.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Our friend Neo Positivity is speaking at the Spirit Business Collective today. What a great name. That evokes all kinds of thought, right? You know, so we're missing him, but I'm sure he'll be back and have some really cool stories to tell us. But Debbie G is here. She has her wings on. And as our guest duly noted, she has joy up in the corner of her screen. So we are set for anything today. And I got to tell you something, Debbie. I think I gave you a little clue before this, but I did some work earlier today with a guest who's on recently who is an LP expert, and she's into various kinds of healings and so forth. And there's been stuff I've been wanting to work on. So I did a session with her today, and it went really, really well. I mean, I came out of that. I went into it feeling, which is where I'd been at, the last couple of weeks. And I came out of it feeling, ooh, okay, here we go. So if you're experiencing different energy from me today, you'll understand why. That's really what's going on. So that's what's going on with me.
I've had a release.
I've had a release, yes.
Walt, that could sound weird. Just saying.
Well, it depends on how you take it.
You know what? It's my job. Did I accomplish what I set out to do?
You always do. I mean, seriously.
No, that one didn't work as well because you're not as red.
Well, see, that's what happens when you do a spiritual awakening earlier in the day. You know, you're kind of ready for everything at some point, you know? It's not that big of a deal.
You got to be ready for anything and everything that just comes up into life. And
Absolutely.
So I'm excited. We closed on our ranch in
Colorado.
Done. Dealio. Can you say retreats are coming and intentional community, which is one of the things that we just love, that is available in Colorado, not so much in Huntington Beach, California. You can't really do that here. It's just not so much. But it's an amazing.
I've seen the photos too. The photos are just absolutely mind blowing. I mean, you've got one heck of a facility there. Just amazing. It's
beautiful. I didn't create it. I'm telling you that I created it, but the universe took it.
Right.
Then the question always gets asked, like, how did you manifest this? Or how was it 2.5 years ago? You didn't have a car, didn't know where you were going with your son, and and it's really simple. The answer has always been so simple. And I know this, when you lose it all and you're just, whatever you think was that you needed, it's not lost, and stuff is stuff. But when it all goes, and it's just you, raw to the earth. And it's all on Facebook Live. There's nothing left. I mean, all pride's gone. There's this beautiful, beautiful knowingness that comes in, of grateful beingness. And you put out, you say, this is what I love. It's not what I don't have. And appreciate the moment of where you're at. That's the protocol. It's a protocol. And if I get out of that protocol, I'm going to know it because I'm going to feel it.
Yeah, but look what happens when you stay in that protocol, because that's what you've manifested. You manifested this amazing retreat in the middle of Colorado, and just from the photos, I can tell this is going to get a lot of attention. A lot of people are going to see this. A lot of people are going to be a part of the retreats that you put on. It's going to be good.
It's healing. You know what, Elisabeth? There's artesian water there. We just had it tested. Like, it's better than Voss. Okay, hello. I'm just like, yeah, just. I'm about it. We're 10 minutes from the hot springs. We are on geothermal land, and the beauty in that is all the work they're doing with the geothermal pipelines now to warm homes and do all those things. And that's really big out in Colorado. So it's something I want to check into, but all within alignment of sustainable living and community and all of those things that we talk about all the time. And that's what's most important. And I think that this journey taught me that too. It's about community. It's not about me and what I need and what I want and yada, yada, yada. And though I love that I get all that I love and want, that's not it. It's about what I'm giving out and giving away. And here you go, because it was never mine to begin with.
I'm all the guests on a number of levels, not the least of which, I don't know if you noticed this, Debbie, but our
Right.
guest's last name is Lava. You're just talking about geothermal, and her last name is Lava. How perfect is that, right?
Because she's hot.
She's hot. Absolutely. So let's bring her on, Elisabeth Lava. First of all, I don't know if you're aware of this. She actually runs retreats. So like we're going to have a retreat theme going on here today. That's going to be part of the conversation no matter what. But I'm going to let her tell her own story. She has an amazing story. But Elisabeth, first of all, thank you for joining us on the program today. We appreciate you taking the time from Colorado to connect in. This is a Colorado day too. There's definite themes going on here. But welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much, Walt and Debbie, for having me. It's, you're both just really fun to even just listen to.
Yeah.
And, I have a lot in common with Debbie. It's fascinating. So, I actually wrote a book about my experience, but there's all this history before that I'd rather focus on and where I've been since. So I used to be a large animal veterinarian and, going from farm to farm and ranch to ranch. And I then became a public health leader, a more broad one, and an epidemiologist. And I was a state public health veterinarian. And an epidemiologist looks at what is affecting the whole population, epi meaning upon, demo of the populace, everyone. And so I ended up becoming very specialized in that for many years. And then I decided I wanted to live in community, Debbie, like Debbie was talking about. I was, ended up going from being in a rural area and getting to know all these farmers and ranchers. And then my career and life events led me to instead work in big cities and talking to people on the phone and staring at the computer. And I developed relationships with local health departments, but I didn't really feel a deep connection with community. And I decided to shift my career and became a local health department director. And it was kind of weird how it fell in my lap. I mean, I basically was like, I feel like a broken record. I don't want to be a public health veterinarian anymore. I want to really help a community that I can be part of. So I started interviewing for local health department jobs. And there's one that popped up in the community where I live now that I was just interviewing for experience. I figured they would never hire me because I'm not a nurse or a doctor. I'm a former veterinarian and an epidemiologist. But the interview went so well. As soon as I walked out of the room, I was like, oh my God. So anyway, I ended up becoming a public health director, which was really great that they gave me the opportunity as a former veterinarian. But I did well on the interviews. And what I noticed, so I was like, okay, this is a very different job than what I had before. And I would go to these meetings with 5 other health department directors, and we would talk about what's going on in the whole region. And so we'd come together quarterly. And I noticed that the last assessment that they did before I started was that mental health and substance use was one of the 4 issues we're supposed to be addressing. But we never really talked about it. Like we would talk about it for like 5 minutes and then nothing. And I could just tell by being in the communities that this is really the number one issue we need to be addressing. And so we all take turns being chair, and I became chair. And I promised once I became chair that I would not let mental health not be addressed. Oh. And they reminded me though, Elisabeth, we don't have money for it. That goes to a different department for the state. It's called Human Services or Social Services. And they've got their own behavioral health organizations, and we address physical health. I said, okay, I get that. But we need to be part of the conversation because it's all intertwined. You can't separate physical and mental health. You can, but if you want to look at what's going on in the population holistically, like we like to be treated, being looked at holistic as a whole human, you should be doing the same. We should at least be at the table and talking. So I said, what if I find some funding? Ooh. And they said, sure, you can look.
Such confidence.
Yeah, they're just like, the local health department's doing mental health work, And so I ended up, of course, like 4 or 5 weeks later, boom, I hear about this big innovative grant from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid coming to the state of Colorado. And Colorado was one of these innovative grant recipients. And the whole point of it was to integrate mental health into primary care and to reduce stigma around mental health and substance use issues by doing things like mental health first aid training for the public. And it just goes on. A lot of things about billing so that doctors will then get reimbursed if they do some mental health work with a partner in their office and all that. So I was busting my butt with leading the grant because I got it. And then I had to lead it for the whole 6 counties. And I'm like, this is pretty hard. Like, trying to move the needle on that was so hard. And about halfway through, I had become so stressed out with that and an additional substance use prevention grant that I would come home and complain a lot. Oh. And my partner took off. He's like, ooh. I can't handle this anymore.
Wow.
And I get why he left.
Okay. Well, that's honest.
Oh, yeah, good golly, I love you. What did I tell you? I told you right before we started. First off, I want to appreciate your story. What I've been hearing you say along this journey is that you met some roadblocks. Mm-hmm. I want to say that your mission's on point and that I see where each one of those are important in this chapter of that you're leading right now. So I'm excited to hear where you're going with this. But I have to tell you, I fully understand the partner thing because I said to Walt, I had this epiphany the other day. I was like, oh, I got to Google what's going on with me. God. And I'm like, oh, am I subconsciously sabotaging myself? Oh yeah. He didn't do it. I lied. he didn't do it. You know what I mean? Like the thing. And so, yeah, we know why that they would do that because we get in our space sometimes. So I understand. Well,
Debbie, I just have to say, there's a part in my book where I talk about, I went to Google something. This happened for weeks on end. I haven't even told you the punchline yet. And and the internet would land on web pages that had nothing to do with what I was searching. And I was like, what is going on? There's something wrong with my computer. I need a new computer. And after the 4th time of it, I stopped and I go, maybe I should look at this. And I said, oh, good grief. This is exactly what I need to read about something else. Is not what I'm searching for. Yep. Happened over and over and over again. Oh, and shortly after that, I had been texting my counselor. I need an appointment. Apparently, God works through Google. And the next day, I went to a temple associated with the spiritual path that I'm on, and the monk said the same statement. God works through Google the next day. And I was like, yeah. So anyway, that's just, so I love the Google thing. You are adorable. And I absolutely know that that's true. So this is the beginning of the darkness, right? So, I ended up, he was the love of my life. He was the most amazing man I've ever met. And I could not handle losing him. I thought we were going to get married. We co-owned a house, marriage was in the cards. And I ended up becoming clinically depressed because I was shredding myself. My inner critic is so strong.
Yeah.
I think, every mistake I made, all the things, could I do it over again? Nope, there was no option for that.
Yeah, really, those inner critics are really, really good at just tearing us apart. We're experts at it. And we know exactly which buttons to push, right?
Better than anyone else does.
Absolutely. Who knows better than us, right?
Yeah. So, I ended up not sleep for about 8 months. I only slept about 3 hours or less per night. And so that sleep deprivation really made it worse. And here's where law of attraction comes in.
Like it wasn't here already.
Yeah. Well, to rewind for just a moment, I ended up going to my doctors and, I told them I'm really struggling. I'm not sleeping. I'm seeing a mental health counselor. They're saying I'm clinically depressed. I saw it on the screen. Was like, oh, this is the real deal. And they're all trying to put me on antidepressants. I'm like, isn't there another way? And I did all the other self-care, take some vacations and take baths, all that, see friends. And it wasn't working. And I was like, it was so painful. My whole body was racked, like aching. And I couldn't get myself out of it. And I remember this moment where I took an antidepressant and I'm looking at the bottle at the withdrawal symptoms. I'm like, that's the same thing I'm going through right now. Like, this is just putting it off. Like, there's got to be another way. And then I also was a triathlete, and I have, I said, stomach issues. I was training for a half Ironman, and I was like, I don't want to take this. I looked in the mirror, tear rolling down my face, and I said, I'm going to figure out another way. Wow. So I started spiritually exploring without realizing that's what I was doing. I ended up meeting certain people, was powerful moments that led me to go to the library to check out books about mindfulness and meditation. So I started practicing being fully present. And I realized, what else is missing at this present moment? What's wrong? And it's like, unless I have to pee, eat, or sleep, really usually everything is quite perfect. And when I realized that, I'm like, I have a really good life. Just because he's not in my life anymore, it's okay. And I started coming out of depression, and then I started meditating. And within a few weeks, I started having these like crazy out of body experiences. I was like, what is this? And so from the point of having that moment where I am leading a mental health grant for a 6-county region where suicide rates and substance use prevention, substance use is quite high. And here I am battling with depression. I'm doing things that are outside of the paradigm of the grant that I'm in charge of. And I'm starting to have these surreal out of body experiences and and it was crazy. I'd be like driving down the road and I'd be like, whoa, I should not be on the road. I'm seriously was blissed out beyond belief, and it kept coming. And then things started happening, like my chakras opening. And this is the funny thing. I come from a very science-based, like physicians and nurses going back. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm studying infectious disease. I'm a veterinarian. I am so science-based, but I took a yoga instructor course a few years before. And there's all this stuff about chakras and all this
crazy spiritual stuff, right?
Yeah. And I was like, this is woo-woo.
Right.
Woo-woo to the wow-wow. Here we go.
It's like, a politician that doesn't believe in something until something, a certain issue, until it slams them in the face, and then they become an advocate for it, right? So I'm like, So I basically mentioned it to my traditional counselor. I go to her and I go, so is it normal when you're coming out of depression to have euphorias? Like,
I love it.
Like orgasms? And she's like, what? And I'm not telling her anything else because I'm going to be put in an institution.
Right. You do know where the limits are. That's good to know.
Yeah, for sure.
So I got pretty bad, and I just basically, during my little meditation moments, I'm like, I need help. I don't know what's happening to me, but this is pretty scary.
It's disorienting.
And then I ended up having a series of traumas through that, because the mixture of the darkness and then having blissful moments when you're a female and you're attracting in some dark energy, people that aren't very evolved, and then they feel your bliss. It was pretty scary. So I started getting in a lot of trouble. And I ended up going on this retreat in southwestern Colorado at the Tara Mandala, which is the Buddhist community. And I didn't even know I was going to Buddhist community. I just was Shiva Ray's coming. This is who I learned how to teach yoga from. I gotta go.
Shiva Ray is pretty rad. I mean, honestly. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So, I ended up, getting to, interact with lovely Buddhist people, and I was like so drawn to them. But here comes this person across the crowd, and just all of a sudden I'm sitting eating lunch, and I look up and I'm like, hello. And she's like, hi. She puts out her hand. My name is Laura. And so basically what ended up happening, and I talk about it in the book, where I start realizing that if she's a counselor, because I was trying to figure out, you look familiar. And she goes, yeah, you do too. And I thought we figured out that she used to teach yoga at this festival thing that I used to go to and all. Oh. And then because I was asking her questions to figure out where I knew her from, when she said she's a psychotherapist, I'm like, she's spiritual and she's she's a psychologist, or a mental health therapist. So I basically just pulled her aside towards the end of the retreat, and I said, I know you're still on a retreat, but I don't know who to talk. Maybe if you're here and you're a mental health therapist, maybe you can help me. And she's been my counselor since.
Wow.
Yeah, which was a few years ago now. And what that story demonstrates is what my big message is that mental health counselors need to have some level of spiritual competency, meaning that they're ready to support their client spiritually, meaning helping them go as deep spiritually to understand what they're facing, and also to recognize the spiritual awakening, which is what I was having. And of course, this woman had a very similar experience. And she felt like she was like, oh, she actually gave me my first session free, and we knew right away that it was the match made in heaven. She really was a godsend, honestly. So, I'm actually taking a course, just starting out a course in spiritual competency, that's really designed for mental health professionals, just so I can see what David Lukoff and Cassandra Veaton, there are a couple of really well-known psychologists who are leaders in this field. And, they talk a lot about, like Cassandra Veaton talks about bias, like whatever your belief system is, if you're a mental health counselor or physical health care provider, and then you have somebody come in and they have a very different belief system, like how to still serve them deeply in a way that is appropriate for them. Right. And, so anyway, I ended up, switching from being a health department director to, taking holistic health coaching, life purpose, spiritual emergence coaching, and spiritual coaching. And during the spiritual emergence coaching, I was introduced to Emma Bragdon, who is a thought leader on this topic. What is a spiritual emergence? What is a spiritual emergency? And that phrase, spiritual emergency, actually comes. Are you guys familiar with the Groffs?
That was new.
I recognize that.
Stanislav and Christina Groff. They wrote.
I know those names. About it.
So she's not alive anymore, but she had a very similar experience to mine. But she was put in an institution, and meanwhile, her husband is a psychiatrist who's actually quite deeply spiritual and can recognize that what she was institutionalized for was not a psychotic break. It was a spiritual experience she was having. So when I was taking the spiritual emergence coaching course, I was like, oh, wow. Like I'm reading about all this. I've experienced so much of what is in this course, and I really want to coach people one-on-one. And Emma Bragdon is, she's written many books about the topic, and she basically said, if you want to do this one-on-one, because the training was really for group facilitation, you need to take a life coaching training. And I was like, perfect. I've been waiting for the right course. Tell me which one. And I love the life purpose, because I think, when our inner core values are then being reflected in the work we do, it's in alignment with each other, our mental health improves. No doubt. So I just, so I blend all of those together, and I absolutely love it. Some of my, clients, actually the majority of them, I make sure that they are seeing a mental health counselor if they need one, and that they're going to the right one and they're getting the right services. Because if they're wanting to go, deep spiritually, I actually have a list, of mental health counselors that I know of that are very deep spiritually inclined and know how to support their clients that way. Nice.
That's something that's encouraging to me, because and you kind of outlined it very nicely with your story, that 25, 30 years ago, if you had talked to anybody in the mental health field, and I know this for a fact because my wife is a former psychotherapist, so I could talk to her and learn some of this stuff from her, which I have done. If you brought up anything that was spiritually oriented, you were at risk of being censured. You were at real risk in your career. It has a ways to go. There's still quite a bit of growth that has to be done, but there's been a lot of movement. I think part of the movement has happened because of the positive psychology movement. That's made a big impact, but also just people who are in the field are beginning to open up in ways that they never did before. And I kind of think that's what your story helps to illustrate. I mean, certainly your story illustrates your own path, your own growth that you've gone through, but it also illustrates it's starting. It started a while ago. It's been happening for a while, and it's an encouraging thing. I find it very encouraging anyway.
I personally love this because I love how you were talking about that when you were going to take the prescription that wasn't your path. And I really dig that you stuck with your guns on that, because masking a situation versus getting to the root are two different things. You've also brought up values, and I love that values are the thing that when we can connect with our own values and then we're connecting with others based on value is a huge thing for me today to be emotionally connected to others and their values, you know, so I loved that. But in mental health, I agree. That is true. When they can start seeing things differently, it changes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you say about psilocybin and using different protocols?
Oh, here we go.
Because look, if you can't be in the mental health industry right now and not know about psilocybin, the works that are coming through Johns Hopkins are just huge. It's blowing up. Zappy Zappelin's touring all over the United States right now, talking about recovery meaning freedom from actual addiction. And that doesn't mean go back out and use, because it's just no longer there. The healing is taking place. Now, I would like to know what you think about that and like how you're vibing with that right now. I know that you can't mix it with medications and stuff, but I know that but anyway, I'll be quiet.
Part of Emma Bragdon's course on spiritual emergence coaching, we talk about plant medicine and how use of plant medicine can trigger a spiritual awakening. And a lot of people are seeking, and they decide to go that route. I don't discourage any of my clients. I don't tell them don't do it. I just talked to a client not too long ago who said, I'm going to ayahuasca ceremony. I'm hoping it's going to help me make this huge life decision. And maybe I'm putting too much expectations on it. And then I was like, slow down. I was like, okay, tell me more about the ayahuasca, because I wanted to make sure it was safe. That he had a safety plan. I'm like, so, can you tell me a little bit more? Have you researched this person? Because, you know, it's a pretty wild ride. Yeah.
Well, with ayahuasca's like, I haven't done that. But however, it's in Costa Rica where they have a medical team and they have shaman, and I've vetted, and we know people who, the people that are running that are ones that can be trusted just by the feedback from the thousands of people that have been there. So here's what I got to say though. There is no magic cure than doing your work. Practice. You got to do your practice.
And that's actually interesting you said that, because, I don't know how much I should say. Let's just say
anything. You can say whatever that you like, love.
So I bumped into somebody who knows one of my teachers quite well on a personal level. And that person, that teacher, is saying this is spiritual bypassing, which is very different than how I use the word. It's trying to take a shortcut. So I've actually had this conversation. I was actually at a temple in Denver in May. And of course I taught yoga at this big festival, saw these young people. And then I go to this temple in Denver, 12-hour drive apart, and they show up at the same place. And they started talking about plant medicine and ayahuasca and their trips on that. And I was like, well, it's really fascinating that you guys are here. You're definitely big time seekers. What's your opinion about this meditative path that you're here to get initiated on versus plant medicine? And he said, he's a really young man, but old soul. He goes, plant medicine only takes you so far. Yeah, you got to do the work. Yeah. You got to do the work.
Do the work. You can't get out of doing the work, no matter what.
Interesting.
You just can't. I mean, as much as we'd like to. But spiritual bypassing is thinking you're going to get out of doing the work. So, I mean,
it's true.
It always comes right back up and goes like that.
So one last thing, and I wanted to see what you thought, Debbie, was, because I want to talk more. I'm not an expert at all on plant medicine. Okay. I just want to say that right now. But what I say to my clients is, do you have a mental health counselor, and do you have an appointment with that counselor soon after the ayahuasca ceremony? Or is there somebody there that is going to help you process? And as an example, a recent conversation I had was, oh yeah, this woman I have a romantic interest in. I'm like, that's going to be biased. That's not a person to process this. You really want someone who specializes in processing ayahuasca, or is a mental health professional that has experience and understands what you may have gone through, and to support you to integrate. And so this client was like, yep, I have an appointment the week, just 2 days later. I'm like, perfect. Okay. did they ask for your emergency contact, and who is that? Like that's how much I want to make sure that their experience is as safe as possible, and it's their choice, you know. Now, psilocybin, I'll have to say, let's see, I've had some really crazy journeys in terms of interacting with certain souls that, you know, I know it was previous life interactions that were very challenging for me. And there's this one person that I totally adore, and we did something called trauma bonding, and I didn't know what that was.
Trauma bonding's a fun little tool, isn't it?
Oh, no.
Well, you know, yeah, but go ahead. Yeah,
there's different aspects of trauma bonding. So so I was actually taking an embodiment coaching, and they dove deep with, you know, Peter Levine and, you know, Body Keeps the Score and all. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea. And all of a sudden I'm reading about trauma bonding, and I was like, ooh, sometimes two souls come together because they had a spiritual awakening triggered by trauma, but they may not have done their other core personal work around healing from that trauma and start traumatizing other people. Yeah. And that's what I experienced. It was scary. I was like, oh. And so I talked to my counselor about it, and she said, so is he interested? I'm like, he's never had any mental health counseling and he needs it. And what do I do? You know, I can't force, it's his choice.
Sure.
And a lot of counseling is talk, and that's bringing it up. And so we talked about EMDR, and then she mentioned psilocybin. And she said that could really cause a lot of opening and healing for him. And she said, now, you know, there are certain precautions to take, and she was sharing that with me, and I'm not an expert, so I really shouldn't speak any further on that. But Debbie, what's your thought about psilocybin?
So I will tell you quickly, and then I'm going to have to unify, is we're having this big event on anti-nuclear war prayer. It's a prayer for the next 2 days. We were live from Hiroshima. And so we've got millions of people around the world that are praying, that are in prayer right now. And so I'm going to need to see if I can help them. I'm going to give you, my thought is that the studies I have done, and I've done some intensive studies through the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and what that they're doing. And the studies are profound with certain protocols. We're talking microdosing, such a small amount that literally it's not detectable. And what happens is it's rewiring the brain's pathways. And these people that were suicidal, that literally, and y'all can Google this and look it up because it's just fascinating. But these people are experiencing freedom. They are, I'm not going to say cured. I'm going to say they're well. But practice is everything. The work that you're doing, the accountability, how that you show up. Are you willing to take full responsibility for you and never look outside of yourself again at another human being, being that's them when it's within. And we are our own worst enemy because we can't accept the beauty that we are because we've been conditioned to see we're not. Psilocybin has helped me, and I've done microdosing. I'm not now, but I have. And that's one of the neat parts about it too. You don't have to keep doing it. And it really helped change my perspectives drastically. What I love is that the reports are showing that it's long lasting and the actual brain pathways are changed. And I love that you're a scientist. I wonder if it's epigenetics with it. Or is it true? If you look at The Fabulous Fungi, which is on Netflix, and you watch that documentary, you were the one that told me about it, Walt. And I watched this and I'm like, this is so rad. So what I think is that I think that we were given misinformation by the pharmaceutical companies, by doctors who were taught this information, and it came from somewhere when many, many centuries have went by and these plants were used by society. Well, maybe not society we consider society, but ancient wisdom. It's ancient wisdom of our ancestry, and I believe that it is in our DNA. We have DMT in our brain. We have cannabinoids. We have this in our bodies. And it's like, that's part of the makeup, and we are part of that. If it's something that could, I don't know that it's going to help everyone, but if it can help even one person to be free from that thing, then I absolutely think that it's worth it. If a person can be free of feeling like they don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is what I say. And I want to stick, I will be right back. I'm going to go check on this right behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. Because I know you have to be kicking off. Coming back.
Oh, shoot. It's 6 minutes to 2. I also have to do that.
Yeah.
You know what, Elisabeth? You rock. And I appreciate you. And I'm going to watch the end of this so I can hear it. But we also have a show called Unify Women Rising on Unify. We could talk about that later too, because I think what you're talking about is fascinating. And I work with a lot of people in the addiction arena, so in the mental health arena. So there's a whole lot of stuff that we could talk about for days.
Okay.
So I just think you're fascinating and I appreciate you.
Ditto, Debbie. Thank you.
Bye, honey.
We'll see you next week, Debbie.
Bye.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah, you can tell why I love Debbie so much. She's a bundle of energy, first of all. She's a bundle of knowledge, second of all. And man, she's just fun every single episode. It's just a blast. Yeah.
awesome.
She's a personality.
Yes.
But even carrying on with the conversation with the direction Debbie kind of dragged you into, she mentioned the documentary Fantastic Fungi. You've seen that one, I take it?
I just have friends that have been sending it to me and I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. So.
Oh, you got to see it.
Okay.
I mean, if for no other reason than to see the cinematography. The cinematography, the stop action, the CGI stuff is fabulous.
Wow.
They put a lot of time and energy into it. And just on an entertainment level, it's a great film. Never mind the information that they're portraying. Just enjoying it is fun.
Wonderful.
It's so well done. One of the fascinating parts of the film, of course, and she was alluding to this, is that they do talk about people discovering and using psilocybin to break through personal blocks, if you want to call it that. Obviously, we talk about blocks in law of attraction land a lot, so we'll use that term. And I think probably the most fascinating part about it is it's almost like a flashback to the 1960s, the 60s drug culture and so forth. And I was in my early teens in those years, so I kind of didn't really quite make that particular scene, so to speak, but I was well aware of it. And that whole scene produced a lot of damage, but it did create some awareness. And when you look at some things that have come out of that knowledge, one of them being this area of psilocybin, there's potential here. There's real potential. I think that's what Debbie latches on to. There's a lot of potential. So I'm glad you guys went down that path. I want to go back though to your story, because your story is a cool story. I mean, you've been on this path. You were the veterinarian, then you went into the mental health field, the public health field, and then you started going off into your own life coaching field. And in the process, you had, this is the common story that happens with every single guest that comes onto the program. They have their thing, they do a crash and burn, they fly like a phoenix after that, and they developed a new career, and that's what you did. I want to find out what you did after you started to fly like the phoenix. So tell us that part of the story.
Well, I would say the Phoenix was like, trying to fly.
So it was a crash and Phoenix all at the same time. It was like, he kept burning and, burning up and recreating and burning up and recreating in mid-flight. Okay, I get it.
Yeah. I know that some of the real rough parts after my awakening started to settle out was so that I would heal on a deep level, in body, mind, and spirit. And it was just beautiful how I actually started praying for, there's a certain prayer associated with my spiritual path. And it talks about, mental, physical, and spiritual development. And I was like, I was kind of getting tired of, development through harshness. And so I asked for mental, physical, and spiritual healing, please. And then these incredible healers showed up, and I learned about all these different types of modalities that worked well for me to finish my healing. And I mean, every day creates new challenges. And so it's important, of course, to keep that healing journey going. But, so I actually started taking a health coaching course while I was still the health department director, because people would come through the door to get like blood pressure checks and STI, sexually transmitted disease testing. And there wasn't a nurse in the office most days. And so whatever I could do legally, I did.
Oh, okay.
And I really loved that. But most of the time I was doing administration. And so I just had these powerful interactions, including like someone who would walk the door who was just in meltdown crisis.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, then shortly after that, I'm taking mental health first aid courses. And I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done that better, And so I was like, I really like that. I'm missing the one-on-one interactions that I'm having to help support people in this population health field. And I was a veterinarian before. Like when I was a large animal veterinarian, I loved interacting with the horse owners so much. And so, I'm like, maybe I've been in this field for 20 years. How am I going to switch now? And in one of my depressive nights, I'm like, doing the self-medicating social media scrolling. And all of a sudden there's this big spiral that comes. And there's a lot of spirals that were occurring in my life at that point.
Sure.
Spirals. It means it's a symbol of transformation, of renewal. Click on it. And it's this Institute for Integrative Nutrition course. And I kept taking that. Then after, I gave notice at the health department, and I went on a spiritual journey. And I ended up visiting temples, trying different meditative paths, and eventually I was led to a spiritual path that I was actually not prepared for.
How so?
It was just I was born and raised by German Catholic immigrants, and they're lovely, very sweet, ethical souls. But the tradition I was led to is very different in terms of worldviews and religious beliefs.
So a bit of a clash going on there.
Oh, like, oh, wow. And so basically, how a lot of women that have a big awakening, it's called a Kundalini rising. That's what I was having. I was having Kundalini rising. And remember, I was starting to talk about the chakras and all that. So my chakras were opening up, and I was like, Kundalini rising? What? And a lot of women that have that, they go off to India. And I was still leading that grant and, trying to sort everything out and all these Eastern wisdom traditions from India. I'm like, these like dark-skinned, long-haired people that are bringing wisdom to me. I'm like, and finally I just surrendered.
That's not a bad strategy, actually. It really isn't. That's actually I've used that strategy successfully on numerous occasions. It's a tough one, but it's actually pretty good.
Well, I come from very German immigrant family, and I've done Ironman, and you just push through, and you're pushing your own life, and then when all this, and so I started studying the Eastern wisdom traditions in terms of an ancient form of meditation, and I was like, oh, whoa, what did I do to deserve that? So, but at the same time, it's like my family was furious at me. I was having a spiritual awakening that wasn't Catholic.
Yeah, how dare you?
Yeah. And then I started acting differently. Like, you just quit a really awesome government job and you're just like take off in your van, and like, what the hell? You're in your late 40s.
My daughter, the hippie. Oh my God.
So, I started becoming very introspective. So after I meditate, I introspect, and, I'm able to get like kind of this 10,000 foot view on my life and what's my part. What's unhealthy here? Yeah. And this deep meditation is so profound, where it's almost like cleaning out your cupboard, right?
Yeah.
Or brushing your teeth.
But that's a good analogy, because really that's what you're doing. You are cleaning out the cupboard. You're cleaning out the cupboard and the refrigerator and the closet as well. I mean, you're cleaning all of it out.
Yeah. Deep spring cleaning. And if you do that every day, it's so amazing what happens. And, I do notice that I have to be very careful of my thoughts. Because
thoughts become things. They really do. It's annoying. Manifesting,
right? So you ever go watch your thoughts? If they're negative, they certainly can turn things, again, law of attraction and thoughts.
It was one of those things that took me a while to really grasp how to do it, because I realized early on just how many freaking thoughts there are that I have every single day, and like, oh my God, how am I going to keep up with that? Till finally said to me, well, you don't actually have to do that. You can actually monitor the feelings. Oh, thank God. I was so relieved when I heard that.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because, I am in, finished coursework through International Coaching Federation, and I love their program where you can do peer-to-peer coaching. And so you get people who are really coachable because they're fellow coaches, and then you get to experience their skills. And, every time I would request a certain peer coach, I'm like, oh, this one looks like a good match. And I put my request in for top 3 of my choice. Never got anybody on the list. The universe just lined up. And the one coach that was lined up for me that was so powerful was emotional intelligence coach. And she had me fill out an assessment, and there was like a 20-page report. And I'm like, oh, wow. I realized I was spiritual bypassing, where I was trying to meditate so that I wouldn't have certain emotions. And I started learning, oh yeah, right. And I can't just transmute and push down all the emotions. Those emotions are there to serve me about what's right and what's not right.
It's interesting. I know they call it spiritually bypassing. I remember the first time I heard that term, I said, what is that? And then they explained it to me, and my reaction was, that's not spiritual bypassing. That's emotional bypassing. Yeah, but it's called spiritual bypassing. I said, no, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I get it now.
So, are you familiar with the gentleman who came up with that phrase?
I do not know who that is. No.
So I'm pulling out from Emma Bracken's course because she's the one who taught me on this. Okay. So his name is John Wellwood, and I mentioned him in my book because, his books are so profound about relationships and spirituality. And he basically is a psychotherapist. He's not alive anymore. He just passed away a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. But he was on the cutting edge of integrating Western psychology and Eastern wisdom traditions. Okay. To support humanity to be as functional human beings, being divine as we possibly can. So he basically introduced that phrase over 30 years ago. And the way that John Wellwood actually defined it during an interview was, it's a term, I'm going to actually quote him. Spiritual bypassing is a term I coined to describe a process I saw happening in the Buddhist community I was in, and also in myself. Although most of us were sincerely trying to work on ourselves, I noticed a widespread tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Yeah. When we are spiritually bypassing, we often use the goal of awakening or liberation to rationalize what I call premature transcendence, trying to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we have fully faced and made peace with it. Then we tend to use absolute truth to disparage or dismiss relative human needs, feelings, psychological problems, relational difficulties, and developmental deficits. And again, this is not me saying it's John Wellwood. Right. I see this as an occupational hazard of the spiritual path, and that spirituality does involve a vision of going beyond our current karmic situation. And this is a beautiful interview. That's just the beginning of it. And I have zero tolerance for spiritual bypassing, and I experienced it so much when I was interacting with certain people that were deeply spiritual on my spiritual path. And that is not okay. You guys know what that.
Clarify something for me, because you said you have zero tolerance for it. When you say you have zero tolerance, what do you mean by that?
I confront it as diplomatically as I can, mm-hmm. and point out that, trauma, loss, grief, it's a part of the human condition. Mm-hmm. And I basically talk about like Maslow's hierarchy of need as a very simple, if you actually look at that, basic human needs sometimes are being removed from people's lives. And then we're trying to think that they're supposed to just be focusing on their spiritual practice and meditation at the tip, So, there's just lots of examples in terms of, okay, I'll give you an example. I was led to a really sweet healer and he was trying to do a healing over the phone. And I'm like, no, I'm looking for a massage therapist. There's some mistake. and he's still trying to go on with the session. And so he still wanted to hear my story. And I told him, and he said, God only gives a person what they can handle. And I said, do you want to hear how that landed with me? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what about people that commit suicide? They got a little more than they could handle. And he just was like, oh, I could feel him getting contracted over the phone. The sweet, sweet healer ended up becoming like a chaplain. He ended up looking at all these courseworks to prevent him from making a bypassing statement like that, not acknowledging this, I hear this challenge. What have you done to heal from that? What has worked in the past? Are there any resources you need? Being a compassionate person and listening to what someone's going through and not saying something like, well, you had it coming because God knew how you, it's like they need a compassionate voice and space to heal, not saying something flippant like that. And so that's just an example.
It's funny because I totally get what you're saying, and I love what you're saying too. It's funny how these phrases come into our lives and we adapt them to whatever feels good to us. I mean, that's why we do that. We take stuff in, we basically work on it internally, either deliberately or subconsciously, but one way or another, we end up working on it internally, even if it's only for a very limited time. And then we either adopt or we reject. And if we adopt it, maybe we modify it a bit, but we make it our own. And in the process of doing that, we all do it from different perspectives. So one person can have the a particular perspective and say, well, God only gives us what we can handle. And that perspective works fine for them. And another person comes along and the perspective doesn't work for them at all. That was you. The perspective actually rubbed you the wrong way. And I always think about these things and I say, both are completely valid. Mm-hmm. They're absolutely both completely valid. How interesting that we're given these different perspectives to look at the exact same thing, to basically understand the exact same thing in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Really something.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about doing a podcast, because I get so many great perspectives. Seriously, I love that almost more than anything else.
Yeah, that's part of also being a coach or a counselor, is to put you down, to try to look at the circumstances for your client, your patient, through their lens. Yeah. That is not easy to do. I mean, it takes quite a while to know someone. Yeah. It's a skill that counselors are so qualified for, and coaches, instead of, we try to keep them moving forward. Right. And a lot of counselors are tapping into some of the coaching techniques to help their patients moving forward. But I basically try to listen as best I can and ask open-ended questions, and just keep probing until they have their own epiphanies. And when they have those moments, it's such a rewarding field.
One thing that comes up an awful lot, but not all the time, when I'm interviewing people like yourself who have made it their mission in life to help other people in these ways, either as a life coach or a therapist or, some other variant on all these themes, it's a question of whether or not they do it more from a scientific perspective or more from what we euphemistically call the spiritual perspective. Maybe you might even call it a channeling perspective, and some kind of merge it all together. Some are really, really strong on the empathy / psychic / channeling side. Others are much more into the very left brain linear approach. Where do you fall on that spectrum? I'm kind of curious.
Mix them both.
Mix them both, yeah.
That's why I love John Wildwood so much. So he's got a series of books, and his webpage is still up. So it's intermixing them both, and being very discerning, though, about what from the spiritual world is truth, and how to dose it. Into someone's transformation is you need to be very cautious on that. Yeah. And I, as an epidemiologist for 20 years, I looked at data a lot. I mean, I was taught how to go through data and research and figure out, is this just because it's a published scientific journal in some doesn't necessarily mean it's valid. Do you know how to look at how a study was done to see that it was valid? And then in spiritual traditions, there's many paths to the same truth. And there's so many different paths because each one of us is so unique. And so there needs to be a lot of different ways to get to the same truth. And the meditation that I practice is very scientific. It works so well in order to bring realization of realizing that I and everybody else are divine souls temporarily housed in this beautiful temple of our bodies. Yeah. We're here to grow and learn, and hopefully not have to come back one day.
It's funny that you say that, because in my own spiritual development, one of the questions that I would keep running into in my own mind as I learn more and more about how in this life we actually choose to come into this life, and a lot of this is pre-planned, and then we make these soul contracts and so forth. And each time I hear one of these stories, I say to myself, what was I thinking?
Yeah, totally. When you get that statement, you picked your parents or you picked your siblings, you just want to whack them. You're like, stop. You should be whacking yourself, right? My belief system is, I could not have figured out that was the family that I needed to be born into. There were divine forces that knew that's what I needed. And my soul wanted that lesson to be in that moment, but it wasn't like, did I really select it? I don't know. So it takes a little bit of the sting of that concept out. Like there's certain growth we need, and we we choose what we really want to, like what divine qualities we want to work on. I had a between life soul regression done through, I hope I remember his name correctly, Robert Schwartz.
Okay.
And that was pretty eye-opening. And I had an appointment with my counselor like 2 days later, and thank heavens, because I was like, whoa.
Oh, it is really woo. Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely, so I've definitely explored a lot about what it is I want to do in this life. What is my purpose? And I actually also did Vedic astrology. Are you familiar with that?
I can't say I'm familiar with it. I'm aware of it. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So it's instead of Western astrology, it's Eastern, and it's based in the Hindu tradition. Right. And Vedic means based on the Vedas, which is the word Veda means truth. And so it's very ancient and quite precise. I mean, the Vedic astrologers, if you get one who really knows what they're doing, they want to know exactly down to the minute and where you were born.
Right.
And so that really revealed to me a lot about my personality up to this point, what I am, kind of the stars and the planets shaped me to be in this lifetime. And so I sometimes recommend to clients to get that, especially if they're going through like a huge life transition and they want to change their career and they're like thinking of tons of different options. Like I have all these tools to help people hone in on what is right for them, what's reasonable, what's feasible, and empower them. But it's really helpful to know from Eastern traditions of wisdom of how you were actually designed. And then, I use Western approaches too. So there are psychologists that actually focus on life purpose and have tools. One is called The Power of Purpose, and I'm forgetting that author's name. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. But, and that is a very Western approach, to, elucidating someone's purpose. It's really in alignment with their core values. So yeah, I mix both. And I certainly at the beginning of each coaching, I ask the clients if they want to do a brief meditation. And it's interesting. So for a while, I was just kind of doing some sessions with meditation, some without. And whenever I started it with meditation, the session went so much better. And we know that meditation actually increases your intuition.
Yep.
It increases not just the clients, but mine too.
Sure.
And I tend to be more fully present when I do that with them, and they are too. And then, some people are not spiritually exploring that I support, but most of them eventually go there because once I start guiding them through meditation, they want more of it.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me because ultimately anybody who is looking for help like this is looking for answers, right? And when you start getting answers, it almost doesn't even matter where you're getting them from. It's that you're getting them. So when you're getting them, the old rules that might have prevented you from exploring because, oh no, that's woo woo, that's crazy, that's whatever. Those get blown by the board because you got an answer that resonated. That makes a difference. So I think we're actually, I've had a lot of guests on lately with the medical background. I mean, you had the veterinary background. I had an orthopedic surgeon on, just yesterday, actually. I had, a children's chiropractor on recently. A lot of people in the medical field. And one of the fascinating things that keeps coming out over and over and over again is that these are people who are kind of stepping outside the mainstream. They're no longer part of that mainstream medical community because they're discovering there's more out there that's useful to them in their practices. And they want to incorporate them. And I first of all, I find that to be very healthy. And second of all, I find it to be encouraging because what that really means to me is they are also listening to that inner voice and they're liking what they're hearing and they want to follow it more. Some are further along than others. Some are kind of at the early part of the journey. Doesn't matter. They're still learning how to pay attention to that inner voice. I think that's huge. So yeah, this is right in line with all of that experience that I've been having lately. It's great.
That's wonderful. Yeah, there's a gentleman who's a board certified psychiatrist that is the president of some associations and boards, and his name is Dr. James Lake. And so he's an MD, and he wrote a series of books about integrative approaches to mental health, and it's so cool. He created a booklet about integrative approach to anxiety, integrative approach to PTSD,
right.
Integrative approach to, and so there's a series of books, and the booklets are designed for physicians to give to their patients to talk about other, besides just using meds and talk therapy, what else is there? And so as a coach, I'm like, okay. I end up recommending the booklets to some of my clients, and then they'll read it and then take it to their doctor. So it's the other direction that's happening.
Right.
And the doctor is like, yep. Great. Yes. You want to do these other approaches? And, and so, and then I support them creating a plan so that whatever integrative approach made sense to them while they're talking to their healthcare provider and after they've been reflecting about it. So that's the other way, that I blend East and West, is I make sure people are getting their medical checkups. If, an annual, do they have a relationship with a doctor? Hopefully have a mental health care provider if they're really facing something very, very deeply challenging that beyond what a coach should do. Because we're not supposed to be supporting people through a diagnosed clinical mental illness. That's not our role.
Right.
So, and I definitely was mentally ill. I mean, I was so depressed, and I needed to be seeing a counselor at that time. And so I definitely blend both. And I think that a lot of people are nationally, there's a lot of talk about this.
Yeah, I'm loving that. I think it's fabulous. And as usual, we've blown through an hour. That's what always happens here. It's like, boom, what happened? Oh my God, it's gone. But it's been very well worthwhile. Before we go, though, we got to get some information from you. First of all, you have a book. Still, I love the name of the book. Tell people the name of the book.
Stillness and Wilderness, a bold ride from despair to deep wisdom and love.
I love those first three words, stillness and wilderness. That's great. And so people want to find out about the book. I imagine they can find that at the usual sources. Yeah,
it's available on Amazon. And if you go into your local bookstore, they can order one through Ingram Spark. That's all the independent bookstores. I have it on Audible. And if any of the listeners want a free Audible copy, I have some promotional copies left. They can reach out to me. They can go to my webpage, which is Elisabeth with an S, so like Elisabeth, lava.com. If you can't remember my name, I help people be authentically themselves. So I have a Be True You with 2 E's, a bee flying.
Okay. There we go. Well, I'll make it simple. I'll include a link in the show notes so that they can't remember. That'll be really easy. But I love that. That's cute. A little mnemonic is great. That's fabulous. And this has been a great conversation. This has been wonderful. Thanks for coming on and sharing your life story. And wow, you've been through some adventures, to say the least. There were a few things I wanted to ask you about, but there just wasn't enough time. But thank you for what you were able to share.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the interview. It was such an honor. Thanks, Walt.
Glad to have you. And also, and I'm trying to do this more and more. I'm consciously remembering to do this each time. There are people that you reach out to through your website and through stuff that you post online and so forth, who never see you. They never hear you, or more precisely, you never see them. You never hear them, but they see what you've got. They read what you've got. They absorb your content, and you're helping them. And on their behalf, I want to thank you for what you do for them. Because I'm sure you get feedback from the people you work with directly in your office and Zoom sessions and so forth. But I want to thank you on behalf of the people you don't see.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I just want to say one last thing about my book. The best part is the list of resources at the back. There's about 7 pages. It's very dense in terms of resources for those who may be having a spiritual awakening that's really fast. Okay. Maybe perhaps triggered by a mental health crisis. Sure. And then there is a list of training resources for mental and healthcare providers if they're interested in weaving in spiritual competency into their services to help people heal. And on my webpage, you'll see that I put retreats on, I do workshops, and I really love bringing people into the stillness of 10 acres of land that I have in Colorado, where I've already had a couple of retreats, and I'm doing a custom VIP VIP retreat one-on-one starting next week for a week.
Ooh,
yeah,
very nice. Oh, I wish we'd had more time to talk about this stuff. There's so much good here. So much yumminess to talk about, but hey, you can only do what you can do. Well, thank you once again, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you, Debbie G. While you were able to be here, as usual, you were Debbie G-ing, as you always do. Neil, we'll see you next week. And thank you to all of our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.